All right, welcome to The Explainer. Now, if you're in the dive industry, you know that being ready for anything is just part of the job. But how ready are we really? A recent survey from the Business of Diving Institute dug into this, asking some pretty tough questions about our rescue skills. And honestly, the answers might surprise you. Let's dive in.
So, let's kick things off with a number that really hits home. 55%. Think about that. Over half of everyone surveyed, and that includes pros and regular divers, have been involved in a real-life diver rescue. And if you narrow that down to just us professionals, that number shoots up even higher. So right off the bat, we know this isn't some abstract concept. For most of us, this is something we've actually faced.
And that fact right there brings up a really critical question, doesn't it? I mean, with the stakes being that high, are the skills we count on to save a life actually fresh? The data from the survey, well, it suggests we might have a bit of a problem keeping those skills current.
Okay, so let's start with the absolute foundation of any emergency response, right? We're talking first aid and CPR. Before we even think about skills in the water, let's look at how current we are with the basics.
You know, pretty much every training agency out there says you should refresh these skills every 2 years. It's standard practice. But here's where it gets interesting. The survey found that over a third of recreational pros and more than a quarter of tech pros are past that 2-year mark. That's a huge number of people out there whose most fundamental skills might be, well, a little rusty.
And it gets even more concerning when we move from general first aid to skills that are specific to scuba rescue. Look at this. More than half of recreational pros haven't had a refresher in over 2 years. And let's be clear, we're talking about the hands-on skills you need to, say, bring an unconscious diver up from depth. That's a big deal.
This trend just keeps going when we look at oxygen provider training, which, as you know, is one of the most important things we can do in a dive emergency. Almost half of rec pros are out of date with their training, but honestly, the really alarming part is that little slice right there. Almost 1 in 10 have never had O2 provider training at all. Wow. So, with all this skill decay we're seeing, the survey uncovered something, well, kind of fascinating. A psychological paradox, really. It's this classic thing of how we see ourselves versus how we see everyone else in the industry.
All right, so first up, the survey asked pros to rate their own skills. On a scale of 1 to 5, how ready do you feel personally to jump in and handle an emergency?
And the results? Pretty high self-confidence across the board. Recreational pros gave themselves a solid 4.0 out of 5. Technical pros even higher at 4.2. I mean, on the surface, that sounds great, doesn't it? It seems like we all feel pretty prepared. But here comes the twist. The survey then flipped the question. It asked, okay, that's you, but how confident are you in the staff working at other dive shops? Does that same level of confidence carry over when we're looking at our peers?
And the answer is a big, resounding nope. Confidence just tanks. Recreational pros rate their peers almost a full point lower, down to a 3.2. And get this, the tech divers, their confidence in other operators craters to a 2.7 out of 5. That is a massive disconnect. It's basically saying, yeah, I'm ready, but I'm not so sure about the guy on the next boat over.
And that brings us to what might be the single most alarming finding in this entire survey. It has to do with the very specific risks we see in technical diving. Okay, brace yourself for this one. Over 1 in 5, we're talking 22.3% of active tech diving pros admit they have never had formal rescue training specifically for tech diving. Let that sink in. These are professionals leading complex dives in overhead environments, on rebreathers, without formal training on how to handle an emergency in that exact context. The survey itself called this finding stunning. And yeah, they're not wrong.
And here's the real kicker. This huge gap in training exists even though 92.3% of everyone who answered the survey, tech and rec pros, agrees that training agencies should be offering these tech-specific rescue courses. So everybody knows we need it, everybody wants it, but the training just isn't happening. The skill isn't there.
So all of this really brings the whole problem into sharp focus, doesn't it? It doesn't matter if we're talking about basic CPR or advanced technical rescue, we're seeing the same pattern over and over. A big, persistent gap between what we all believe is the right way to do things and what we're actually doing in the real world.
Let's just call it what it is, the readiness gap. It's that space between the safety standards we all talk about and the day-to-day reality of how current our skills actually are. It's the difference between preaching safety and actually practicing it.
And you can see this gap in the plain, hard numbers. When you ask pros how often they should refresh their rescue skills, almost 60% say every year. But then you ask how many actually do it annually, that number drops to around 43%. It's a textbook case of our intentions not quite matching up with our actions.
So let's just quickly pull this all together. What has this data really shown us? We've got a currency gap. Our skills just aren't being refreshed often enough. We've got a confidence gap. We think we're great, but we're not so sure about the other guy. And maybe most importantly, we have a massive tech training gap, where some of our most advanced pros are going without critical, specialized training. Look, at the end of the day, this data isn't just a bunch of numbers on a page. It's a challenge. It leaves every single one of us, every operator, every instructor, every dive master, with a really important question to think about. What are we going to do about it? What's the next step for you personally and for us as an entire industry to close this readiness gap and make sure we're as prepared as we think we are?